Well, Bulldog Faith Part 3. One more to go after this. We've been talking about what quality of faith we should look for in ourselves and look for in each other. And I asked this question in the first of the series. If your faith was a dog, what would it look like? And to the disappointment of everybody, it's not a yappy little Yorkie. It's a bulldog, which isn't necessarily cute, but it does get the job done. And when it's got a hold on something, it won't let go. So that's the idea behind this. And last week, I talked about faith that won't back down. And today I'm going to talk about another aspect of faith called risky faith. Faith that takes risks. And here's the idea. So just in case you want to kind of fall asleep now, or switch off or whatever, which would be very naughty, but just in case, because it's a hot day, I'll tell you what the big idea is first. The big idea is this, that great faith is not comfortable faith. Great faith isn't comfortable. And I used to say this line, and I'll say it again now for everybody, is the way it is we have to get uncomfortable with being comfortable. And we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because faith exists outside our comfort zone. It exists outside what is possible for us. It exists outside the natural. Faith, like Jesus talked about, isn't comfortable faith. It doesn't fill a chair on a Sunday morning and go away and it makes no difference for the rest of the week. The faith that Jesus talked about is uncomfortable. And in some ways, we've tailored our church experience these days to making everybody feel so comfortable that they've forgotten what it is to see something that is beyond their comfort zone. And so, great faith is not comfortable faith. And most people, you see, this is the challenge, isn't it? Because most people in the world, and a lot of people in the church world, they want all the benefits of faith without any of the risks. And we'd all like that, wouldn't we? You'd love to have all the benefits without any effort, wouldn't you? And we can think like that, and we can go, well, it's just not happened yet. It's not working. It's not this. It's not. I didn't like that. I didn't like that song. I didn't like that preach. I didn't like this. And the benefits of faith come with risk attached. And often we want certainty before obedience. We want clarity before we'll move. We want a guarantee before we'll surrender. And the kingdom doesn't work like that. The world works like that. The natural world works like that. Economics and all those sort of things work like that. But the kingdom doesn't work like that. So if we want to be kingdom people, we have to change our mindset. God rarely works in the natural, but he does always work in the supernatural. And when you look at the Bible, when you read the Bible, one of the things you find is this, that the people who experience God most deeply were usually the people willing to step into uncertainty with confidence in him. So the people who knew God best and got that experience, that deep experience of knowing him, his presence, his power, his wisdom, and all the rest of it, were the people who were prepared to live with uncertainty, to live outside their comfort zone. And you see, just think about it. Noah built an ark before any rain ever fell. Abraham left where he was before he knew where he was going. That's kind of cool, isn't it? Like, we'll just set off. We'll just set off. We used to... when we were young, we used to do this thing when we just learnt to drive. And we just set off one evening, and we wouldn't have any particular thing. We'd just get to a road end, and we'd have a vote on whether we were left or right. And hopefully, because we were young lads, hopefully at some point, with the left and the right and whatever, you would find civilization and a pub, which was the whole point of it. But that's kind of what Abraham did. He just set off and he listened for God's guidance. And that can't have been comfortable. It wasn't comfortable. Joshua marches round the walls 7 times before they ever fall. Who'd have given up at 3 or 4? You see, Peter, he stepped out before his foot touched the water. He put weight on it before his foot touched the water. Here's the thing. Faith that changes your life almost always requires risk. And I'm going to expand on that this morning. Because here's kind of that tension. Here's that point. You can't stay safe or fully trust God. You can't do both at the same time. You're either going to stay safe or you're going to trust God. But you can't do both at the same time. Because if you're ensuring and making certain that you are absolutely safe and you're absolutely comfortable and there's no stress and no pressure and no obligation, you are not trusting God. Because God exists outside of staying safe. Let me expand on this. Let me tell you a little bit of story. Let me tell you some history. The history of this church. Okay? And a lot of you know the starting point of the church, in that there was 8 of us gathered together in our dining room who had a belief that God wanted to do something miraculous, who wanted to teach faith, who wanted to teach people who they were in Christ, and raise a body of believers who had an expectation that they would see God move miraculously in their own lives. That's how we started. And so Cheryl and I were teaching this, so there was 8 of us, and we've been going several weeks. And at some point, I can't remember who it was, but we decided that as a church we were going to call ourselves Faith Life. And here's the thing. Somebody said, and again, I can't remember who it was, but somebody said, shouldn't we do something that involves faith then? And so 8 of us decided we'd do something. We would trust God that this thing was meant to be bigger than 8 people, that God would do something amazing through those 8 people. And at that point, there is no guarantee that we would ever be 9 or 10 or 12 people. But here's what we did, because we prayed about it and we felt this is what God wanted to do. Here's what we did. We raised amongst the 8 people £12,000, spent it on PA equipment, and hired a room that would take 70 people. And we decided we're going to start on that day, and we pitched up with the potential of having a temporary worship leader and 8 people. That's how we started. That's a risk, because that's pretty embarrassing for 8 people in a room that takes 70 and you've got all the PA equipment. Here's what happened. 35 people turned up that first morning. Were you one of... Roger came the first morning. He came to see what we were up to. And we've never let him leave. He's chained to that front seat. Some of those just came to cheer us on. I don't know which camp Roger was in, because we knew Roger before and he knew some of the people who started. But the next week, we were kind of 20. And that God did something special. Now, here's the point. What if we just stayed in our dining room? What if we stayed in our dining room? What if we hadn't been obedient in our giving? I'll tell you what, you wouldn't be here this morning. You wouldn't be here this morning, and whatever you've been blessed by through this church would never have happened. Here's something else that wouldn't have happened. There would be a whole load of TV programs and documentaries focusing on children who come through the care system that would never have been made. There would not exist a charity in London that looks after kids who have been abandoned by their parents. There wouldn't be a church of now approximately 200 people in Croydon, which was started by somebody who was ready to walk away from God when they came to one of our meetings. It wouldn't exist. There wouldn't be a church in Bulgaria that has supported to the tune of 15,000 meals a quarter Ukrainian refugees, that ministers into the gypsy camps, that has grown and grown and is now approaching 200 as well. That would not exist. And there's so many other things. There wouldn't be senior figures speaking up for God in the government of Uganda. They wouldn't be there. And it all comes down to that decision that 8 people made, that they would take a risk on God. Here's what else wouldn't be. There would have been no healings. No people set free from addiction. No people getting delivered. There would be a couple in Holland who lead 2 churches who would have had nobody to lean on through some really difficult times that they've gone through over the years. We would never even have known them. There wouldn't be a group in Norwich who are listening to this. And there wouldn't be any other churches that have influenced and mentored by us. They wouldn't be there. The point is, I'm not satisfied. I think God still has more than what we've already seen. And you see, that original group, the thing is, some of us have got a bit older. And some of those who were in that original group have moved on, they've retired, they've gone to different parts of their country. They're not here. But to do what we did requires God to be able to move on people's hearts, to be generous, and to help minister and serve. So that generation who got us this far, they would say to you, if they were here, you need to pick up the baton. You need to pick up the baton in generosity. You need to pick up the baton in faith. You need to pick up the baton in taking those risks that we did. Trusting God. Being willing to fall flat on our face with full embarrassment if God didn't come through, but believing that he would because he's promised. And we need to pick up that baton. Those who provided finances over the years, new people need to pick up that baton. Those who've served over the years, new people need to pick up that baton. Because otherwise, something dreadful happens. We never see what God has in our future. If you take that original example back, and yet let's say we have, on a normal morning, not this morning, but on a normal morning, we have about 80 plus adults in the room, yeah? If you expanded that original, that original leap would equate to this. It would be 80 people raising, on a single morning, £120,000. And booking a room that takes 700. That's the equivalent leap of faith. And we need some boldness around this. it's no longer, in the world we live in the times we live in, it's no longer enough to just wander into church and wander out again. We have to build something that creates the things that God wants to do, so the things that have already happened and changed our society and affected nations carry on doing what they need to do in the future with new people who are going to come and be here, and we can bless and we can disciple. You're getting the point? You see, the calling of a church is not to plateau. And it's easy to look at us. And you see, when you go for stuff like this, what you've got to understand, when you go for stuff like this, some people don't want to go with you. And some people cause problems because they don't want to go with you. And over the years, we've had times that have been difficult, and that's kind of stuck us at a plateau. The churches in Croydon, the churches in Bulgaria and so on, they haven't quite been through that, and they're like rocketing ahead. Not that they're doing anything different, but because they haven't had that thing. And the reason for this is nothing to do with people, really. It's to do with an enemy who is resisting and doesn't want a body of believers to rise up and see all that we can see. He doesn't want a body of believers who will take on a challenge. He wants a body of believers who are comfortable. That's what the enemy wants, a body of believers who are comfortable. But I don't think and I don't believe that is our destiny. I think our destiny is to see more people healed. And we've been praying for people already this morning. I think our destiny is to see more people saved. I think our destiny is to see more people set out in freedom. I think our destiny is to see more addictions broken. I think our destiny is to see more people delivered from oppression. I think our destiny is to win more. I think our destiny is to grow more. Every single individual in this room to grow more, to know Jesus more, to influence more, to affect more, to overcome more, to see more victories in their life, to experience more of his presence, experience more of his love, experience more of his power, experience more of his authority. That's our destiny. That requires all of us to move outside our comfort zone. We've got to get uncomfortable with being comfortable. Let me tell you a story. It's a Bible story. And you're probably going, Mark's not done any verses yet. I'm coming to some verses. This is a Bible story, okay? Story is a really bad word, isn't it? Because this is a true story. And it occurs after Jesus, he's already been out on the lake previously with his disciples, and he's asleep in the back of the boat, and the storm kicks off, and the disciples get very scared, and they wake Jesus up, and he calms the storm, and then says, guys, why did you need me to do it? I've given you what you need. And then a little bit later, what happens is there's a whole crowd of people, thousands of people following Jesus. They get down to the lake shore, and there's 5,000 people. They've been there all day. Jesus has been teaching them. By the way, Jesus' sermons are a lot longer than my sermons. Just get used to it. That might happen in heaven. They've been there all day, and they're hungry. And the disciples are panicking. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And Jesus says, well, what have you got? Like he said to those first 8 people, what have you got? What will you give up for what I want to do? And we find there's 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And Jesus takes them and he blesses them. And then he gives the 5 loaves and 2 fishes to the disciples and says, feed the people. And as the disciples go to feed the people, the miracle happens. And straight after that, Jesus decides he wants to get away from the crowd, go and be with his Father. They go down to the lake shore, and Jesus, and it says this, Jesus had to forcibly make them get into the boat, and he tells them they're going to the other side of the lake. And the reason he had to forcibly tell them to get into the boat is there's a storm coming. And if you remember, out of that 12, there's quite a high proportion of fishermen. And they knew there's a storm coming. They didn't want to go out there. But Jesus says, you're going to the other side. Here's the thing. It's a test. But it's not a test to catch them out. It's to test to show them how far they've come. What have they learnt from what they've already seen that they will take and see more with? And so he tells them it's going to the side. And it's like a training exercise for them to take them to the next level. Of course, he didn't explain it to them all in those terms. He just told them we're going to the other side. Because they now have his word that they are going to the other side. Remember, he's the guy that's already stilled the storm and he's already fed the 5,000. And now there's a storm coming. Here's where we get to. Verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone. So hours have gone past, by the way. And the boat was already a considerable distance from land. Well done, those disciples. They set off in obedience to what God had told them, not knowing how they were going to get through that storm. Buffeted by the waves because the wind was against them. A few more hours passed. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walk on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. By the way, if you saw somebody walking across the English Channel or Lake Windermere to you, what would be your conclusion about who that person was? Ghost? Probably a good guess. My head's gone funny would be a better guess. But here's the thing. Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Jesus says the same to every single person in this room this morning. Take courage, I'm here, don't be afraid. And then it continues. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. That's kind of a leap, isn't it? There's 11 of them going, there's a ghost. We don't like ghosts. There's a storm. What's going on? And there's Peter. He sees it's Jesus. Jesus tells him it's him. And suddenly, what does he do? He goes, I won't plateau. I want to go further. I want to see more. If Jesus can walk on the water and he's already told me I will do what he is doing and greater things, I want to walk on the water too. I'm taking this test on and I'm upping the bar. That's what Peter's doing. And Jesus said, come. You only need one word from Jesus, and you just do it. Sometimes we want 6 months of explanation and guarantees. Peter had one word, come. So he gets out the boat, walks on the water, as you know, probably, and he comes towards Jesus. Now just imagine that moment. Peter is walking towards Jesus. There's the disciples in the boat going, this guy is crazy. He is walking on water. Oh, I wish I'd tried that. The waves are crashing, the wind's howling, the rain's pelting down, there's fear everywhere, and Peter's doing the unthinkable. And he's doing the unthinkable, not because the storm stopped, not because the situation became safe, but because Jesus said one word to him, come. And he obeyed. So let's unpack that a bit. Here's the first thing. Risky faith, real risky faith, begins with trusting God more than your circumstances. See, I think, maybe it's just me, but most of us still make decisions on the basis of what's most secure. Peter made his decision on the basis of who Jesus is. We make decisions on the basis of what's secure. Peter made his decision on the basis of who Jesus is. Faith isn't pretending that storms don't exist. Faith is believing that Jesus is greater than the storm. And honestly, we need to be people who can go through some stuff and come out the other side. You know, we shouldn't have, as we grow in, we need to look at ourselves and go, I want and I'm developing a faith that doesn't collapse the minute something comes along that's challenging. The minute somebody says something, the minute somebody hurts me, the minute somebody does this, the minute somebody does that. A faith that refuses to make an excuse of offense. Offense is how the world thinks. It shouldn't be in the vocabulary of a Christian. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 7 says this: we live by faith, not by sight. Living by sight says, I'll obey when it makes sense. I'll obey when I can see how it'll happen. I'll obey when I've got all these other things sorted out. I'll obey when it doesn't cost me. I'll obey when everybody else is obeying. And I'll join the crowd. I'll give when I feel financially secure. I'll forgive when I think people deserve it. I'll serve, but only when it's convenient. That's living by sight. Faith says, if God is leading, I'll trust him and I'll do whatever it takes. God is leading, I'll trust him and I'll do whatever it takes. And some of your greatest regrets, when you get to the end of your life, some of your greatest regrets in life, when you look back, will have been the times you stayed in the boat when Jesus was asking you to move out of the boat and take the risk. And you go, why didn't I do it? Why didn't I try it? Why didn't I help? Why didn't I get involved? Why didn't I do that? Here's the second thing about real faith. It looks foolish to other people. If you think, who is this idiot stood up at the front this morning? That's a normal reaction to faith. I mean, imagine the other disciples. I mean, I've already given you a little caricature of them, but like before Peter actually manages to walk on the water, what are they thinking? They're thinking, this guy is an idiot. What is he doing? Peter's lost his mind. It's that ghost. It scared Peter. You're not getting me out there. I think I'll just row on this side of the boat and keep rowing and just ignore what's going on. Faith looks uncomfortable and foolish from the outside. Remember how Noah looked stupid to everybody when he was building the ark? People laughed at David when he said he was going to go up against Goliath. The widow looked foolish giving her last coin. Here's the thing. faith should not be evaluated by public opinion. Your faith should not be evaluated by public opinion. You must not let your faith be evaluated by what other people think and say. Hebrews 11 says this: faith is the confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. And sometimes your obedience, I'll give you a warning of this, sometimes you're going to obey God in the future and people are not going to applaud. And sometimes when you obey God in the future, you are going to confuse some people until they see God come through for you. Here's the thing: you cannot follow Jesus wholeheartedly while being controlled by the approval of others. And when you lead a church like Cheryl and I do, you have to learn that. One of the real blessings that we've had over the years is that I had a career before we did this. And thanks to God, that career was successful. That means, and has meant, that in Faith Life, for its entire life, and God said this to me at the start: you have already been successful, so you don't have to pursue success. And what he meant by that is the approval of others. And that's why I teach what I teach. And some people haven't liked what I teach over the years. They've found it too challenging. They've found it too direct. They've found it really uncomfortable. But my brief, what I was told from God, was you preach the scriptures and you preach all the scriptures, not just the stuff that makes people feel comfortable. Because if you preach the stuff that makes people feel comfortable, you aren't talking about nearly everything Jesus said. Because that's really uncomfortable. Count the cost before you start. Lay down your life. Love one another as I've loved you. Very uncomfortable. Sounds nice. Really hard to do. Really hard to try. Particularly when they've upset you. So I'm glad God blessed us. Because it's meant that I'm not fearful of people. Obviously I want to bless people, but I don't have to back off from teaching what the word says. I'm not fazed by numbers. I'd like more numbers. I'd like us to reach more and more people. That's really important. I'd like us to see more and more people healed. I'd like us to see every single person in this room every week inviting people. I'd like that. Not for me, but so that other people can hear the things that God's given us to teach and why he called us in the first place. Here's the next one. Risky faith requires keeping your eyes on Jesus. Peter walked on water until he took his eyes off Jesus and got them on the storm. Matthew 14:30 says, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, crying out, Lord, save me. Now, just want you to see some things here. Firstly, he began to sink. I don't know how you begin to sink when walking on water. Because when I've tried walking on water, I don't begin to sink, I just sink really quickly. So I don't know what that's like. I mean, is it kind of his faith is wavering? What's going on? But he's beginning to sink. He's kind of like, his feet are disappearing and it's up to his knees. And he's still going like this with his feet below the water. I don't know. It's kind of funny. But here's the point. Notice this. The storm has not changed one iota. What changed was Peter changed his focus. And doesn't that happen to us too? We start with faith. We start with the right intentions. We get all excited. We tell people that God's turned our life around, and yeah, I'm really going for it now. And 6 months later, you go like, where are you? Where are you? And people set off with courage, and then it seems to fail. People are confident, and then they're not. Because what happens is the diagnosis comes. The relationship kicks off. The finances tighten. You haven't seen the answer to the prayer that you want answering yet. And suddenly, your focus is off Jesus and on the storm. And you begin to sink. And the more you sink, the more you become fearful. Because fear shifts your focus from Jesus. And when that happens, you have to make an intentional decision to get back your focus on Jesus. You go back to him. You get back in the world. You get back around your church family. And you get back around people who are walking in faith. Not people who tell you it doesn't matter. And not people go, oh, we all fail. Jesus doesn't do that. You don't want to be around people like that when you're in a mess. Because the best you're going to get is sympathy. You're not going to get an answer. And you're not going to get a miracle. Again, that might upset some people that I said that. But guys, we need to move beyond sympathy. Because sympathy is what the world can give. If that's all we've got a problem. And here's kind of my last point. If I could get the worship team back at some point. I have lost a worship leader. Anyway, it's a long final point, so it's all right. You don't need to run. Okay. Here's the point. Even failing in faith is better than never stepping out. Even if you fail. What if we'd done all that and nobody turned up that first day apart from the 8 of us? We actually cheated. We brought 2 people down from Macclesfield so that we knew there was going to be 10 in a room that took 70. Because after all, we needed somebody who could use the PA equipment and actually play a musical instrument, and none of the 8 could. So we needed somebody. And here's the thing. Peter sank. Back to my point. Failing in faith is better than never stepping out. Peter sank. But Peter also walked on water. 11 disciples stayed dry in the boat and missed their miracle. What if all 12 had walked on water? How cool would that be? And some Christians become so afraid of failure that they avoid obedience. And the thing that goes through their head is, I want to believe for that. I want to step out in that. I want to do that. I want to serve there. I want to give that. But what if it doesn't work? Even failing in faith is better than not trying. Let me finish it with this story, because this happened at Pentecost. And years ago, I used to be, when it still existed and it was still about, I was the pastor at the Grafton Centre. You remember that? The Grafton Centre? Me being pastor there? So I used to go around and talk to people who worked in shops and pretend I was a lovely pastor and kind and holy and sympathetic, of course. And it wasn't really me, but I kind of got it passed on from somebody else. And what happened was, coming up to this thing, we were organising something called Pentecost Praise, and we were having it in that big rotunda bit in the middle of the Grafton Centre. So people could come, and there was chairs out, and we were going to do praise service, and people were going to give testimony. And a couple of weeks before that, I'd been riding my bike along the back of Addenbrooke's. Most of you have passed where this happened this morning. You know that back entrance to Addenbrooke's that comes off Long Road? I'm cycling past there, and this car came past me, but came past me too close, and I was thrown off my bike. And I went kind of up in the air and landed smack on the pavement on my knee and elbow. And I kind of stand up, and you know, like when you're in shock, you don't notice at first, but then after a few seconds, it was absolute agony. And I looked down, and my jeans were like, already there was blood seeping through them. And my elbow was bleeding through. And I put my hand on my knee where the blood was coming from, and my kneecap was in two pieces, and I was able to put my finger in between them. Oh, sorry, should have given health alert warning there, gory bit. And I was able to put my finger between them. And it's kind of like, so as I was at the back entrance of Addenbrooke's, what did I do? I kind of hopped to A&E. And I'm trying to ring Cheryl to tell her what's happened. And Cheryl's out for lunch. And guys, don't ring Cheryl when she's out for lunch. Sometimes you wonder why I gave her a mobile phone. I'm always ringing. No answer. Out for lunch. Anyway, she's out for lunch. Can't get her. And I go in, and this doctor examines me and sticks her finger in. She goes, oh, that's nasty. We're going to have to clean that out, and then you're going to have to go for some x-rays. And your elbow, that seems to be broken as well. It popped. Well, there's a sac that contains all the fluid in there, and it had shaved off the point of my elbow. Gory bit again. And so I'm in there, and then Cheryl eventually turns up, having finished her lunch. And she comes in and goes, can I pray for you? And she prayed for me. No, before. And then they wheel me off down for an x-ray. So they x-ray me, and when they have the x-ray, they then wheel you back for the doctor to tell you what's going on and so on. And I'm there waiting, and the doctor comes in, and she said, sorry, Mr. Baines, I'm going to have to send you back for another x-ray, because they haven't taken it from the right angle, so I can't see what I've already seen. So they took me back for another x-ray, and they took every possible angle of this knee. And when it came back again, she said, I don't understand this, because what I have seen and what I have touched is not showing on this x-ray. This is showing a complete intact kneecap. And I don't understand what I saw. I don't know what happened there. You'll have to, I apologize. I mean, it was really painful still, and so God healed it. It was healed. So here's the point. Sorry, guys. I'm at Pentecost Praise 2 weeks later, and I'm giving this testimony, because it's Pentecost, isn't it? So I'm giving it again at Pentecost. I'm giving this testimony at Pentecost, and then we do... as pastor of the Grafton, in the middle of the Grafton, I say, anybody want healing prayer? Come up here now. So we pray for people in the middle of the Grafton to get healed. And because it's Pentecost Place, there was other churches there, lots of other churches. And one of the pastors of the other church, I sat down next to him. He was on the front row after I'd been given this testimony. He said, it's amazing. It's amazing what God did. I can't go there on faith. And I said, well, why can't you? Why can't you pray for people in the church? Because I'm worried that if somebody's not healed, people will lose their confidence and respect in me. And that, I get it. But it's also one of the saddest things I've ever heard. Because if this was about me or you, we should just all give up. We should just go home. This is about Jesus. And no risk, no miracle. No stepping out, no miracle. No obedience, no miracle. No life changed. If we hadn't obeyed at the start, you guys wouldn't be here. And so whatever you've been blessed by through Faith Life was down to those original guys. Now it's time to pick up the baton because we want to see more. Cheryl's going to make you wait longer, Joe.
Don't go anywhere. Mark was talking one thing I just did want to ask.
It's on.
Before we stepped out at the start, right at the beginning, we had tested that word that we were called into ministry for a long time, hadn't we? 10 years. That is a long time.
Nobody wanted us.
And we then, because we did feel all of those things, Mark was in a really successful career. We'd been moved down here. So many other doors had been shut to us. And we just thought, we don't know how to do this. And a year after thinking, well, maybe we just start something, God said, I've called you to this, and now you're in disobedience. And that really shocked us, didn't it? Well, he told Mark. Mark came to me and said, oh, I've just heard the word of God that we are actually in disobedience now. So we stepped out trusting him, but it was really uncomfortable because it had taken us a long time to get to the obedience bit. We were trying to work it all out in the natural. Well, if we have that duck there and that duck there and that, and it's all in a natural row, then we can do it. And then at some point we just thought, oh, this is too difficult, we're not going to do it. And that's when God said, well, you're now in disobedience. So when we actually stepped out and it was so uncomfortable in so many different areas. And it was hard, but we knew that we couldn't live not being in obedience to Christ. But we did have the word. So it wasn't just I think I'll do this or I think I'll do that. We actually had a word from God that we tested over a lot of time. And we spent time with other pastors saying this is what we believe, but we're not sure. And we were definite then that it was right, that this is what we do. And so when we stepped out, it wasn't comfortable. But when you step out on the word of God, then you know that it's going to be okay. And even if it's difficult, it wasn't easy, and we did have difficulties. And ministry life, if anybody's, going into ministry, all the guys that we've mentored that think they've got a word to go into ministry, we have said, you have to really test this, because ministry life is not easy, and it's the whole time it's never been easy. But when you know that God's called you, you go through the difficult times and he is with you. And the Apostle Paul said to God when he was under persecution, because it was difficult for him, and he said, please take this persecution away from me, this thorn out of my side. The thorn is persecution, not sickness. I'll just throw that one in. Anyway, talk to me about that one later if you don't agree. And God said, my grace is sufficient. So when you're stepping out, it might not be comfortable, but his grace is sufficient for all situations. Even in the difficult times, you have good times, you have difficult times, but his grace, when you're keeping your eyes fixed on him, that's the important bit that Mark brought, his grace will be sufficient for you. Amen. But my main point was you have to have that word from God, because we hear so many people go, oh, God said me to do this, so I'm just going to go and do it. And we're like, I'm not sure. Have you tested it? Oh, no, I just know. Oh, the Holy Spirit said to do this. And I remember a story of somebody who was married, he was married, and somebody came and said, not that we know, this is a story, I've been told by God that I'm going to marry you. And he said, no, I don't think that's right because I'm already married. So there are testings of words. But when you know that you have a solid word from God, and stepping out might be uncomfortable, but do it because he is with you. And don't take 10 years.